Part 3, Chapter 11, The Loyalists. Here we shall concern ourselves particularly with those orthodox communists who made a display of their ideological orthodoxy first to the interrogator, then in the prison cells, and then in camp to all and everyone, and now recall their camp past in this light. By a strange selective process, none of them will be sloggers. Such people ordinarily had held big jobs before their arrest, and had had an enviable situation, and in camp they found it hardest of all to reconcile themselves to extinction, and they fought fiercest of all to rise above the universal zero. In this category were all the interrogators, prosecutors, judges, and camp officials who had landed behind bars, and all the theoreticians, dogmatists, and loudmouths. We have to understand them, and we won't scoff at them. It was painful for them to fall. When you cut down trees, the chips will fly, was the cheerful proverb of justification. And then suddenly they themselves were chopped off with all the other chips. To say that things were painful for them is to say almost nothing. They were incapable of assimilating such a blow, such a downfall, and from their own people, too. From their dear party, and from all appearances, for nothing at all. After all, they had been guilty of nothing as far as the party was concerned. Nothing at all. It was painful for them to such a degree that it was considered taboo among them, uncomradely, to ask, "What were you imprisoned for?" The only squeamish generation of prisoners, the rest of us, in 1945, with tongues hanging out, used to recount our arrests, couldn't wait to tell the story to every chance newcomer we met, and to the whole cell, as if it were an anecdote. Here's the sort of people they were. Olga Sleasberg's husband had already been arrested, and they had come to carry out a search and arrest her, too. The search lasted 4 hours, and she spent those 4 hours sorting out the minutes of the Congress of Stakhanovites of the bristle and brush industry, of which she had been the secretary until the previous day. The incomplete state of the minutes troubled her more than her children, whom she was leaving forever. Even the interrogator conducting the search could not resist telling her, "Come on now, say farewell to your children." Here's the sort of people they were. A letter from her 15-year-old daughter came to Yelizaveta Svetkova in the Kazan prison for long-term prisoners. "Mama, tell me, write to me, are you guilty or not? I hope you weren't guilty, because then I won't join the Komsomol, and I won't forgive them because of you. But if you are guilty, I won't write you any more, and I will hate you." And the mother was stricken by remorse in her damp grave-like cell with its dim little lamp. How could her daughter live without the Komsomol? How could she be permitted to hate Soviet power? Better that she should hate me. And she wrote, "I am guilty. Enter the Komsomol." How could it be anything but hard? It was more than the human heart could bear, to fall beneath the beloved axe, then have to justify its wisdom. But that is the price a man pays for entrusting his God-given soul to human dogma. Even today, any orthodox communist will affirm that Svetkova acted correctly. Even today, they cannot be convinced that this is precisely the perversion of small forces, that the mother perverted her daughter and harmed her soul. Here's the sort of people they were. Y.T. gave sincere testimony against her husband. Anything to aid the party. Oh, how one could pity them if at least now they had come to comprehend their former wretchedness. This whole chapter could have been written quite differently if today, at least, they had forsaken their earlier views. Loyalty? And in our view it is just plain pig-headedness. These devotees of the theory of development construed loyalty to that development to mean renunciation of any personal development whatsoever. As Nikolai Adamovich Vilenchek said, after serving 17 years, "We believed in the party, and we were not mistaken." Is this loyalty or pig-headedness? No, it was not for show and not out of hypocrisy that they argued in their cells in defense of all the government's actions. They needed ideological arguments in order to hold on to a sense of their own rightness, Otherwise, insanity was not far off. How easily one could sympathize with them all. But they all see so clearly what their sufferings were, and they don't see wherein lies their own guilt. This sort of person was not arrested before 1937, and after 1938, very few such people were arrested, and that is why they were named the call-up of 1937. And this would be permissible, but shouldn't be allowed to blur the overall picture. Even at the peak, they were not the only ones being arrested, and those same peasants and workers and young people and engineers and technicians and agronomists and economists and ordinary believers continued to stream in as well. The call-up of 1937 was very loquacious, and having access to the press and radio created the legend of 1937, a legend consisting of 2 points. 1. If they arrested people at all under the Soviet government, it was only in 1937, and it is necessary to speak out and be indignant only about 1937. 2. In 1937 they were the only ones arrested. At the very beginning of our book, we gave a conspectus of the waves pouring into the archipelago during the 2 decades up to 1937. How long all that dragged on, and how many millions there were, but the future call-up of 1937 didn't bat an eyelid and found it all normal. They remained calm while society was being imprisoned. Their outraged reason boiled when their own fellowship began to be imprisoned. Of course, they did not remember how very recently they themselves had helped Stalin destroy the opposition, yes, and even themselves, too. After all, Stalin gave his own weak-willed victims the opportunity of taking a chance and rebelling, for this game was not without its satisfactions for him. To arrest each member of the Central Committee required the sanction of all the others. That is something the playful tiger thought up. And while the sham plenums and conferences proceeded, a paper was passed along the rows which stated impersonally that materials had been received compromising a certain individual, and it was requested that consent be given, or refused, to his expulsion from the Central Committee, and someone else watched to see whether the person reading this paper held it for a long time. And they all signed their names. And that was how the Central Committee of the All-Union Communist Party, Bolsheviks, shot itself. Stalin had calculated and verified their weakness even earlier than that. Once the top level of the party had accepted as their due high wages, secret provisioning facilities, private sanatoriums, it was already in the trap and there was no way to backtrack. They had forgotten even more, yes, and had never read it anyway, such ancient history as the message of the Patriarch Tikhon to the Council of People's Commissars on October 26, 1918. Appealing for mercy and for the release of the innocent, the staunch Patriarch warned them that the blood of all the prophets which was shed from the foundation of the world may be required of this generation. Luke 11:50. And, for all they that take the sword shall perish with the sword. Matthew 26:52. But at that time it seemed absurd, impossible. How could they imagine at the time that history sometimes does know revenge, a sort of voluptuous and delayed justice, but chooses strange forms for it and unexpected executors of its will? And though the curses of the women and children shot in the Crimean Spring of 1921, as Voloshin has told us, were incapable of piercing the breast of Bela Kun, and this was done by his own comrade in the Third International. Here is the inevitable moral. I have been imprisoned for nothing, and that means I am good, and that these people around me are enemies, and have been imprisoned for good cause. And here is how their energy is spent. 6 and 12 times a year they send off complaints, declarations, and petitions. And what do they write about? What do they scrawl in them? Of course, they swear loyalty to the great genius, and without that they won't be released. Of course, they dissociate themselves from those already shot in their case. Of course, they beg to be forgiven and permitted to return to their old jobs at the top. and tomorrow they will gladly accept any party assignment whatever, even to run this camp. And the fact that all the complaints and petitions were met with just as thick a shoal of rejections, well, that was because they didn't reach Stalin. He would have understood. He would have forgiven the benefactor. Fine politicals they were if they begged the government for forgiveness. Here was the level of their consciousness. V.P. Galitzin, son of a district physician, a road engineer, was imprisoned for 140, yes, 140, days in a death cell. Plenty of time to think. And then he got 15 years, and after that, eternal exile. In my mind, nothing changed. I was the same non-party Bolshevik as before. My faith in the party helped me. The fact that the evil was being done not by the party and the government, but by the evil will of certain people. What an analysis. Who came and went, but somehow they never seemed to go. But all the rest remained. However, why this whole chapter? Why this whole lengthy survey and analysis of the Loyalists? Instead, we shall just write in letters a yard high. Janos Kadar, Ladislaw Gomulka, and Gustav Husak. All three of them underwent unjust arrest and interrogation with torture, and all three served time so and so many years. And the whole world sees how much they learned. The whole world has learned what they are worth. End of Part 3, Chapter 11.